All right, I guess we'll get started. So welcome to our last session of the day. It's just a roundtable for HDF5. People are still kind of wandering in here. So is there anybody online that wants to start the discussion about a certain topic? If not, I have one.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
actually, hello everyone again. There was discussion with Mark over compression more. As we know, when we use vol connectors or if we use direct chunk read-write functions, you have to implement your own compression calls, and it would be nice to have interface, because filters will not work in this case, right? Implement interface that can be, any compression can be used once again using some registration or something, but it is mechanism that can be employed in when you do direct chunk access or reading and handling compressed data within ball connectors. I don't know if anyone has experience creating such generic interface or what people think about it.
Nobody in the room. Anybody online?
The TG folks maybe have some ideas. Like handling compression with Dell's connector or, with any other connector.
The Deos connector doesn't support compression. The idea was that Deos would do compression, at the low level.
Right.
We do supply the tools that vol connectors would need to do compression, I believe.
Tools? Which tools?
I'll go check. I believe there's a public interface to HRZ pipeline.
Well, but how you will use public interface for, say, when you do, let's take simple case, reading compressed chunks. Essentially, you have to initialize compression and then use compress, decompress, whatever functions available directly, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just wish list.
Yeah, I might be wrong though. Trying to look right now.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm wrong. Sorry. Yeah, so that could be something that we could add to the wish list.
I did a question for Elena and encryption. So would it be possible then to move file permissions inside the file itself? For example, I mean, currently you can set the file permission, on a Linux system, through the OS, but could you, with encryption, mark that file read-only unless you have permissions to mark it as write-only with encryption? So you could encrypt the file, and then the only way you could, I guess, change that setting would be to decrypt it and then change that permission. Is that part of? Go ahead.
Yes, it is possible to provide, and it will be very useful, for example, for HDF5 to support. You can read, if you have a key, to read a file, but you cannot modify encrypted file. It is possible. We simply didn't have. We look into it, but it was not our first goal. Goal was to show feasibility of VFD approach to encryption. But yes, it's possible.
Right, because I was thinking in terms of, I mentioned yesterday that you can then sign plugins, right? So you could say, you could check to see if a plugin has a signature associated with it, and if it doesn't, then you can't use it. But you could set that flag inside the file itself, and you'd have to protect that flag, right? You couldn't just have that open because anybody could just open it with any library and change it to whatever they want. You'd have to protect it through some kind of encryption permission type permission to say, well, if you want to open this file and you are using a compression filter, for example, that's not signed, you can't do it. It won't allow it.
You know, I was thinking in slightly different angle at this. For example, with zip compression, you may have encoder, but you may not have decoder. You know, at least compression can work this way. So you can read data, but you cannot write compressed data. And with encryption, we can do that. We can, if you have a key, you can decrypt, but you cannot modify the file. I'm not sure how it is related to plugins and file signatures, because as I said, file signature will be separate key and separate thing with encrypted file, like with any other file.
Okay.
But it is good to have, because what we want HDF5 really, if you have a key to be able to read, and if you have this encryption, really can read data. But maybe author does want to modify, and then.
But currently it's all or nothing, right? You can't just encrypt, for example, the super block and have.
No, it is. It's the whole file encrypted, but you still can do partial I/O on encrypted file and read the pieces of information without decrypting the whole file. This is the whole point. That it's in storage and in transition, it always encrypted, and only clear text in plain text in memory.
Okay. Any questions from the discussion topics? Is that from Mark? Does Mark just want to, he can probably just unmute and. Is it,
I think he left.
oh, he left.
Yes.
Okay. So this goes back to the earlier discussion between Quincy and Elena about splitting out the library. I don't know if people want to continue that discussion or just what? Or was there unsaid or unclear discussion points that people want to make clear? Didn't sound like it. I think is Quincy here?
No, Quincy is not there too.
Okay.
I was going to ask him because systems where HDF5 metadata is stored in databases and reading was done from raw data, was read from the file, they are known from early days of HDF5. So I don't know what will be new here. But idea of different plugin that accommodate another way of storing data, of course, it's nice.
So, Elena, like in that regard, for object-based storage, you really do need some kind of sharded storage mechanism, because
right.
you can only do writes that rewrite the entire object.
Right.
So you can do like reads that do a read range, but you can't do writes that do a write range.
Right, and this is, I hope John Mason will not object. We thought about it, and for example, there is a way, if you use page deallocation and your page is an object, you can easily do it with VFD without doing wall connectors.
Right. I remember Thomas, sorry, John, talking about that, but It sounds very fragile to me, right?
No.
Because it is, yeah, because so imagine like you have 5 pages and client 1 updates page 1 and client 2 updates page 3. You're going to have some incompatibility, right? Like you cut up the phonograph record and if they don't exactly line up those edges, you'll have big problems.
We're talking about logical pages in HDF5 file, right? And page allocation in HDF5 file. So yes, you have to implement this multiple reader thing, but it is possible. It is, it is a good project, but the point is that you pushing for wall connectors with different storage, absolutely fine idea, but we don't realize that VFD approach is very, very powerful, and you can do a lot of things with VFD, which gives you advantage of using all features of HDF5 library and cache mechanism and so on. I hope we'll be able to prove it if we have funding, but we'll see. But this is quite easy to create, and it's very cheap development instead of going through wall connectors.
Right. So one challenge with the VFD interface is for object storage is that by the time something gets to the VFD, you're down to doing something that's basically the same as reading bytes off a disk, right? And for S3 access, for performance, you want to have like 16 in-process reads going on. So if it's coming down to read this byte range, read this byte range, read this byte range sequentially, you're going to lose out on all that.
Yeah, and no one told you that you need to stick to this linear, because you can use, if VFD multi-threaded, you can really use multiple requests to read those pages. So
Yes,
it is
well, I mean, but that's putting a lot of burden on the application writer. So if
no, it can be done on VFD layer by internal thread pool or whatever internal
oh, I
request.
see, right. So internal multi-threading.
Exactly, or whatever
Right.
mechanism.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever mechanism, like you mentioned, S3 gives you some kind of proliferation. So it is possible. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's much easier and much quicker delivery than doing through wall connectors, where you're losing, for example, compression when you're working with pages. And remember that you can pages, for example, on object store, you probably don't worry that object, say, data set is spread among several pages. So you really having, for example, gaps in pages, you may have allocation that the whole object is pages do not have any other information except array data. It can be very efficient.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see that the demo we had earlier recast with the ROS3 VFD and comparing the performance of that. I think they'll magnify the performance differential that you saw.
Oh, right. The thing is that we need to make wall connector to go. We have to make VFD layer multi-threaded and enable thread pool in VFD layer 2. And Jordan has a question.
No, I just wanted to throw out there that I think typically what we've seen is that, like you said, VFDs are the quick way to mess with things and map your paradigm to different storage, and maybe even stick with that. And usually vol connectors are the way that people go if they want to add other functionality, like async IO, or for example, in the Deos vol connector, we expose a lot of features that Deos has, like data replication and things like that, because the vol connectors usually bring along their own header files and API functions in addition.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And WAL and VFD mechanisms, I think those are two ways to enhance functionality of HDF5 library. But for WAL connectors, as I mentioned before, we need to add something like, for example, caching. Can we add some caching that all WALs can use some metadata cache or compression? That will be then incredibly useful. I agree. But if we're talking about, say, I know it's controversial, mapping HDF5 linear space, which is logical file, into storage as object store, it can be easily done with VFD, and it will be performing well.
I guess it's also worth mentioning, Elena, that the subfiling VFD, for example, already does multi-threading internally. So we have experience with it.
Right. So we are going to use subfiling for parallel encryption. This is the way to go. And you can stack those VFDs and very nice features very easily achieved. Easily, I think, I'm not doing the work, right? I'm only telling what to do. Right. So it is a very good approach that we should probably advertise more so people can explore this.
Okay. Hey, I have a question about HDF5 2.0. And I've been out of all the very interesting workshop meetings you guys have been having. But I'm just curious because like in the pure HDF presentation, you was talking about all the different kinds of formats for B trees and headers and blah, blah, blah. And it seems such a burden to write applications based upon the file format because of that. And Elena, I guess you were saying that it was a desire to be able to read any file written by any previous version of the library with the current library. But now that we're to version 2.0, is it time to say, okay, the thing that's really 2.0 about 2.0 is that we're not going to support reading an HDF5 file written in the year 2003 or whatever.
Well, but you have a lot of climate data that in HDF5 and in HDF4, what you'll be doing with it.
Well,
so
you use an older, you use HDF5 1 point whatever, right, to read it.
Right, but still, in terms of supporting software, you have to support that legacy format.
Well, yeah, just like we support HDF4, right, still.
That's kind of what we signed up for, right? Is to support all data files. That's the
right,
fundamental.
and we would support it by.
But we don't support.
Supporting HDF5 1 point whatever indefinitely.
Right, but we don't support those older anymore, right? We said.
Oh, no, guys. When you just use the latest library, right, and you do H5D, H5F create, H5D create, and write, 1.2 library will be able to read it because everything will be baking to the earliest version of header messages, except few exceptions that documented because bugs were fixed and then it didn't work. So HDF5 defaults to the earliest version of everything.
I sort of heckled this from the back of the room, but like, why not have HDF6? Like, if you're talking about dropping options, like you've clearly demonstrated that you can keep supporting HDF4 to read existing data in an old format for, like, I assume decades at this point, beyond like HDF5 being the hot new thing. Would it make sense to say HDF6 is the new thing and HDF5 continues in maintenance mode to read the files?
We were talking, Thomas, about that looks like HDF5 data model is powerful and everyone likes it. Then there are APIs because there's so much software written, but really backend can be implemented anyway, and it should be transparent to the users in some sense. So file format is just yes, it's one way of storing data based on HDF5 model that is delivered to storage through HDF5 APIs. So creating a new format kind of does make sense, at least to me, because storage and the implementation of storage does not depend now with vol and VFDs on the model and APIs.
I think you possibly overestimate how well transparency to the user will work with these things. Like my experience with another virtual layer with the virtual data sets is like they're meant to be completely transparent, but not entirely.
And maybe we should talk about better APIs to HDF5 that are more user-friendly, like H5 high-level APIs or whatever it is, because those APIs are really very, fortunately now there is ChatGPT. Believe me, I'm using it to write simple examples. It really works nicely because you cannot remember all APIs. It's not user-friendly. So maybe we should talk about new interface that will be more user-friendly, not only for users, but to all languages that now support HDF5. But HDF, so new format for storing data, and immediately question asked, what do you want from it, right? Why create HDF6?
Well, mostly what I want is for people to leave the HDF5 that we're using in vast quantities alone and not complicate it with layers and layers and layers of abstraction.
Right, that's why I'm really concerned of reworking the library a lot. It creates maintenance burden and so on.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Quincy. It seems like he's doing a lot of work, or proposing a lot of work, that would in large part replicate what Czar world has already done. So does that make sense? Or it wasn't really clear to me what the unique advantage of his proposal was versus Czar. Would it be better just to have a Czar vol that could read and write Czar? Let Czar own that format?
Exactly. I'm having these conversations with him, but people have their own opinions. And more than that, why need? So if we like NetCDF4, it has access to almost everything. They have Czar. They can read OpenDAP or write or whatever. It's much more versatile. And it's really NetCDF, as you remember, it is network common data form. So it is really API, and they never emphasize the storage and the format of how data is stored. And this is a good example that software adapts to new storage and new ways of storing data and metadata. And it's the same interface. It's still NetCDF.
Alexander here from HDF Group. Speaking of NetCDF, I don't know if you heard, but NetCDF staff is sent home.
Yeah, I heard.
There is no anymore NetCDF as a functioning organization.
No, there is. So Ed Hartner forked the repository, and he committed to supporting it through his company, and they're on furlough. It's not.
No, I know they're on furlough, but one guy forking it is not really a sustainability dream come true.
Well, NetCDF community was very good, and if you look at Unidata stuff, there were only one programmer, Dennis, that was really doing work and contribution with Ed. So in this sense, not much changed.
But coming back to this discussion that John mentioned about Czar, and the only issue with, well, not the only issue, but Czar is very pragmatic, and let me compare to HDF5 is simple. In terms of like Czar attributes are JSON values. Mm-hmm. And so if you ever stored anything more complex than a single number, or some very simple things in HDF5 attributes, it's quite questionable where would they go in Czar. And so yes, it's possible to have simple stuff or when I say simple, I mean most typical common data to sort of from HDF5 go into ZAR if you want to use ZAR as a cloud native. But I'm pretty sure that someone out there decided, who mentioned earlier storing images in HDF5 attributes. I'm pretty sure someone came up with this just because HDF5 library allowed it. But I don't know if, that's where we go into this. HDF library allows you a lot of things, and that's a good thing. And HDF library allows you to do lots of things, and that's a bad thing. Like there are no guidelines.
But like Alexander, what are example of something that an HDF5 attribute that you couldn't store in ZAR?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I haven't seen the data yet, although I'm not that much into the HDF5 to ZAR conversion work or people who are doing that.
Okay, take NPOS data, Alexander, and try to map it to ZAR, and there will be a lot of difficulties. But
that's what I'm saying. So someone somewhere probably has it. I'm just bringing this up. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just wanted to bring up this issue. ZAR is a more pragmatic, simplified format that does all the most important things that a data cube format should do, but doesn't match HDF5 intricacies. And that's all I wanted to say.
Sorry to interrupt the discussion.
Sorry.
I was just sitting there, and I don't know. I guess you could not see the room. Tomorrow I will talk a bit about the NetCDF ZAR implementation and the state of it. I've been in touch with Dennis and Ward since last year to see what is the status of it and to get familiar with the implementation, because for us at DKZ is quite an important thing to cover, to have all of these legacy tools, to have the benefits of reading the data that now is being produced with modern ways, let's say. And I guess ZAR kind of is just the first tool to kind of be Python only, whereas all of the others were always like C-based tools wrapped for Python. So regarding the unit data status, I think officially they just have a freeze of fund that coincided with the run out of the previous fiscal year fund. I think by September there should be some new statement or update there. And they also have been releasing quite slowly, so I don't think this stop is really a stop, because as I think Elena was saying, and Dennis has been contributing a lot, although he's already not part of Unidata, and I guess he will keep on doing so whereas possible. And I guess Ward, in his current state, will do whatever possible. And I guess there are also some ways of reaching out to the community to see if they could help there in basically paying some freelance work to work on something that is open source. And Ward assured as well that there's always someone in the office who can press merge request on his command. So yeah, just a quick note on this.
It's good to hear.
Maybe we should also talk, Scott, about new defaults in the library, because some defaults really hurt us now, right?
Yeah, I mean the cloud optimized defaults or just defaults in general?
No, defaults in general. And you guys changed the default size of chunk cache, right?
Right. I know the defaults, for example, fill values, whether we should change that default to be that it should never fill, right? Because that's always caused problems in the past. That I mean, for the most part, that's important for experimentalists where they want to tag where they didn't get a signal or something like that. But for the majority, they want that as default because they know they're going to rewrite all their data. And yeah, so that would be default I would advocate for changing in 2.0.
Yeah,
No?
I agree, because the default is technically it's supposed to be fill if set. So then you would think logically it shouldn't fill anything if you don't set anything. But in practice, it does fill it in many cases, but not all. It's very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we're still using not very efficient, as I said, with if you just don't set any settings, like for example, B-trees will be version 1, right? So that can be changed, so it's more efficient search.
So that's sort of a different topic. I mean, it is the library default, but it's the default version bounds. So that affects file compatibility, whereas the things we've been talking about are more in-memory stuff. So, app compatibility, I guess.
Right, but maybe we should raise awareness. But for example, if someone will start creating group with million members, they will see performance degradation, right, by accessing the groups.
Right.
And this is can be easily fixed by defaulting to 1.8. So at least
Although, if we change the default maximum, made it at a cache item size, then that million can be 2 million or 4 million or something, but still you'll run into the issue eventually.
Right. I forgot, there was some other defaults, and of course it should be, we cannot change it without publicizing it more and thinking through consequences. But I don't think library will be handled backward compatibility, but new files will be created in more efficient way, and library will access in more efficient way.
I mean, that is a problem. Go ahead, Neil.
I was gonna say it's definitely something that's up that we could. I know we consider doing it. I'm not opposed to it if the majority of the community is fine with files being incompatible with older versions of HDF5 by default.
Incompatible with old library versions, right? But it will be. So maybe question should be how far behind applications are on HDF5 library version. For example, does someone still using HDF5 1.4?
I know in CGNS we set it at 1.8. People got mad when we set it to newest because they had readers that were still on 1.8.
Right, and H5 folks told us he dealt with this, different file formats and versioning.
But there's always a gotcha. Go ahead, Neil.
We don't have any mechanism right now. The default is to basically create files in 1.6 format. The only format change before 1.6 I know of was how the array data type was handled, and we don't have code to create the old array data type. So if you want something before 1.6, you need to go download that version of HDF5. So yeah, I don't think there's any discussion of putting it before 1.6.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of gotchas with that. I mean, normally we know as experienced HDF5 users, well, always set to use the latest libver bounds if you can, right? But it's kind of like insider knowledge. And so, as you said, Elena, somebody's going to just blindly use HDF5 and then get, for your situation, that terrible performance. But then we look at it and say, oh, you didn't do this. So it's that kind of disconnect between new users of HDF5 and experienced users, right? That they shouldn't need to have that mental capacity to get good performance out of the box from HDF5.
Right,
that's always frustrating, I think, for users in general.
Right.
You have to know these kind of tricks, especially like in parallel. I mean, most now we recommend to do collective metadata, right? All the code now, basically the default is doing collective if you can, but people just don't know to do that. And it shouldn't be something that they need to know to do that.
Exactly.
But I'm not sure how to get around that.
Just change it.
Yeah, we're talking about defaults, but then people get mad when you change defaults like that. So I don't know.
Let's
Because that
see.
could break, if you require that, oh, you have to do collective metadata, it could break some code, right? That
Right.
Yeah.
Good question. I don't know,
Yes.
but at some point
To a
it
limit.
should be changed, and we should go forward and just wait until those applications extinct. I don't know. So what else do we have on our list?
Let me ask Thomas, what do you see on the roadmap for H5 You guys hear that? Okay, I was asking Thomas. So what's planned for H5
Not a huge amount. Like, it's a fairly quiet project at the moment. A thing that's actually just landed but not yet released is, so in NumPy 2.0, there was a new variable length string data type. So this gives us a more efficient way to represent arrays of strings in memory than, like, so far what we've always done is just construct Python string objects and then make an array of objects, which works but is not super efficient. There's a fair bit of overhead for each string object. So this, NumPy 2.0 introduced a more efficient way of dealing with this, and somebody has just contributed support for reading and writing strings from this format without having to go via the object-based format. What I would, with my H5Py hat on, what I would love to see from libhdf, libhdf5 2.0 is like proper iterators in inverted commas. So, having an object of some kind that you can create, step forwards, get the current object and tell like when it's finished, as opposed to, like, I think all of the iterators in HDF5 at the moment are this like callback style interface, which is kind of a pain to work with for bindings. It makes it hard for us to do something like, it would be lovely to have a like file.walk that you can use natively with a Python for loop, for object in file.walk. But that's not really possible at the moment with the callback-based APIs.
Mm-hmm. We actually found this the problem when implementing multi-threading, so we need to introduce new APIs like getNext. So yes, this will be good to have, especially with multi-threaded library. Current iterators will not work.
Yeah, and the multi-threading thing also, like, obviously that's been a limitation for both HDF5 and Python for a long time. And Python is also working on removing the GIL. Like, there's a very experimental option now in Python to like run without the GIL. And people are starting to play around with, can H5Py be built to be compatible with this? So yeah, the race is on. Will Python or HDF5 get to fully multi-thread compatible first?
Well, so I would be really happy to work with you and experiment with this wall, at least for reading, especially for low-level APIs. It should work out of box, and we should see some improvement there.
That'd be interesting, Elena, to get to the point where, say, someone like Thomas could use that as a test bed, not for production code, but just for experimenting with multi-threading.
Right. This is our goal. We when we finish H5P, because now with H5P not being multi-threaded, each thread has to use its own properties and not mess, like don't have anything common properties until it's implemented. But in general, we can try to do it now, and it will be. I would be glad to to test it. because we have the project for the next year, and the whole point will be to look into performance and to make it to work with applications like H5Pi.
I have two questions for H5Pi now, since we're talking about it. So first one is, as far as I know, H5Pi uses the API version 110 macro when it's being built against the HDF5 library. So, and that's hard coded. So how that impacts essentially all these potentially new features that are coming or currently available in the library since 110, say 114, or even now 2.0. So that's something I'm curious about. And the other question about these variable length strings in NumPy. So what is the HDF5 data type that they are actually getting stored into?
So taking the variable length strings bit first, because that's probably simpler.
Yes, it is.
They are getting stored into the same like HDF5 variable length string data type
Okay.
as object arrays. So for writing, that's easy because obviously we can see what the data that we're writing from, we can see what the data type is. For reading, like it still defaults to reading as the object array of strings, because that's what it has, that's what it's done so far. Or actually it's an object array of bytes rather than strings, but similar principle. And so you have to use an extra, like you say, dataset.as type, and then T is the like data type code for this new NumPy thing. And then it will do the conversion from HDF5 variable length strings. And then the other bit was about, so as you say, H5Pi still builds, it still supports HDF5 back to 1.10. I think it's only like the last bug fix release of 1.10 now. But I think like some Linux distros are like obstinately slow to upgrade. And yeah, we have at least so far said that we want to keep broad compatibility with like relatively old versions of HDF5 if it seems like people may well still be using them. I tend to prefer like having compatibility stuff in the code that I am maintaining to having like users getting stuck on old versions of my code and having to deal with like, oh no, you're hitting a bug that has been fixed, but you can't have the fix. Yeah, we can use like newer features kind of conditionally. So if you build H5Pi with 1.14, which we do for the bundled, so the version that you get from pip install H5Pi has HDF5 bundled into it. We build with, I think it's 1.14.6 now. So it can use newer functions, like even though we're setting the like make the API look like 1.10 thing for compiling HDF5, it still exposes completely new functions, so we can still conditionally expose those in H5Pi. Yeah, other than that, I think the new features have not come up a ton. Yeah, for me, H5Pi is a way of getting access to the HDF5 file format, not like an abstraction over vols and everything. So, yeah. Does that answer the question? As a follow-up.
Yes, that's my point. I mean, if let's say the new APIs and things are coming up in the new version of the library, again, that was my understanding too, that the macro 110 doesn't prevent the new functions to actually be used. It only limits the already existing functions to the 110 version of them, at least as exposed to the H5Pi. But anyway, that thanks for the answer. I don't want to hold up others.
Maybe question in the same direction. I have been starting using HDF5 with C# and of course using all these wrappers. And I would be quite interested in how much are people using C# for accessing HDF5? Does anybody know? Is there a request for it, or am I just the single one?
Gerd has used C# in the past.
Well, users do use C#. It's one of the, especially in the industry.
And someone has cared enough to like fully re-implement, well, not fully, but there is a re-implementation of HDF5 in C#. So you're not the only one.
Yes, I looked at that port, but it's in comparison with the whole C implementation, it's only just maybe 10%. And after 2 days looking at it, I realized, okay, it does not support the features that I need. So I'm back again at writing all these wrappers for all these functions I need. And even more, also we had the problem, I don't know if Gerd is still here. We wrote this H5P invoke for .NET Framework, but this is not any longer compatible with .NET Core. And so if we want to continue our C# journey, we would have to adapt it to also be used by .NET Core. So is there any development? Is Gerd still here?
Gerd will definitely know, not as I know, but he signed off.
Yeah, we'll have to get Gerd. So how do you feel about pure C# HDF?
If there would be someone who implemented it correctly, it would be
you.
no chance, because I'm part of a company with 8 software developers, and we cannot afford to re-implement specification, which is quite complex.
So I guess I think I was mentioning this in the break. What if you took the pure Java HDF and had it translated to C#?
Then we needed Java expert, which we don't have.
You translate the source code to C#.
We didn't think about this right now.
I think that's a thing, and I imagine with the AI would get better. So you probably have to maintain it after that point on your own, but at least you'd have a starting block.
Okay.
Did I hear that you said translate Java to C# or something?
Yeah, remember that project, Alexander, where we had the translator? I forgot it was C# to Java or vice versa.
No, that I would just say don't run away from that as much as possible. It's like sitting on a barrel of radionuclear waste. Yes, there's a foundation called Allotrope that some years ago essentially did exactly that. They translated their Java into C#, including the HDF5 library, and it's a nightmare. So no, I don't think it's a really viable pathway. For HDFP invoke, I don't know. I also, because of working with this foundation, I kind of brushed in HDFP invoke. My understanding is that it's a community project. I don't know that HDF Group formally supports HDFP invoke, if you will, and that whoever would like to make it updated for 1.14 or something, it's welcome, I guess that's the word. But I don't think that HDF Group really has any plans on HDFP invoke, just by doing on its own.
There is a commercial product from Il Numerics, HDF5 interface for .NET, and it's C# and .NET they provide, and I believe it was quite complete, but it's commercial product.
I think we're supposed to end at 35 after, so I guess we'll wrap up this roundtable. And we'll start again tomorrow for last day. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lena had bought 2 classical music tickets, one for tonight, one for Thursday. So if anybody is interested, obviously she can't make it. So if anyone's interested in your tonight's concert or Thursday's concert, talk to me and I'll